my water just broke. I felt like things really intensified.
She was right there and she was coming.
It was an amazing feeling.
I'm going to cry just thinking about it. I could feel her head.
We heard her cry. We were squeezing hands and she was screaming.
I'm Bryn Hunt-Palmer, and you're listening to The Birth Hour. This podcast is designed as a safe place for women to come together to share their childbirth stories. Stick around and join us to hear informative and empowering birth journeys from women all over the world. Today's episode is with Laura. She's going to be sharing a twin birth story. Her water broke at 33 weeks and she stayed in the hospital until 34 weeks. So she shares that birth story as well as a NICU stay and then experience with breastfeeding. This episode is a rebroadcast from May of 2020, and we'll have a few different rebroadcasts over the next few weeks as I take a little bit of time with my kids before they return to school. So stay tuned for some of these episodes from our archives, as well as new episodes popping up here and there throughout the next couple of weeks. All right, let's get to Laura's story. Hi, Laura. Welcome to the Birth Hour. Thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Hi. Thanks so much for having me.
Can you tell listeners a little bit about you and your family?
Sure, yeah. So I'm 36 and I live in Western Massachusetts with my husband, Adam, and our 19-month-old twins, Lola and Phoebe, our dog, Molly, and 2 cats. And my husband and I are both faculty at a university here.
All right. Well, let's start with finding out you were pregnant.
So, I guess one thing I want to mention is, I'm a faculty member in public health, and my research actually focuses on maternity care in the United States. Oh. And a lot of my interests and the research that I've done has to do with the high rates of childbirth interventions that we have in the U.S., including cesareans, and looking into kind of why that might be and understanding how that relates to the quality of care that women receive. So I kind of went into this whole thing having thought more about pregnancy and birth than the average person, as well as thinking about the type of care that I wanted. I guess also to frame this, I had always completely assumed that I would be someone that had essentially a low-risk pregnancy. Yeah, because I've always been very healthy and stuff. So my husband and I are academics, so we'd had a couple of years where one or the other of our careers was a little bit up in the air, where we had like temporary jobs and things like that. So in fall of 2017, we were finally settled somewhere with permanent jobs, and we decided then that was a good time to try to get pregnant.
And you got pregnant pretty quickly, right?
Yeah. So I'd had the copper IUD, and I had that removed, and I got pregnant the next month.
And I know you had a little bit of a surprise early on. So tell us how that went.
Yep. Yeah. So I had chosen a practice that has mostly midwives, but also a couple of OBs, and generally you get seen by the midwives. So I guess I'd had an appointment there soon after I'd found out I was pregnant, just to have them confirm the pregnancy. And then they generally just schedule, I think their regular process was like they don't schedule you for an appointment until 10 weeks or something like that. So I was kind of waiting for that. And we were super excited and ended up telling our parents like pretty early on because we were just too excited to not tell them. And then when I was about 6.5 weeks pregnant, I came home from work on like a Friday night and discovered that I was spotting a little bit. I was worried about it. I think I put in a call to the practice. They talked to me. They were kind of like, no, it's probably not too much to worry about. But the next night I had sort of a bigger bleed, not like a ton, but kind of period-like bleeding for just a short period of time, maybe like half an hour or so. But I spoke to them again, the practice again, and they said, it doesn't really sound like you're having a miscarriage if you're not having, much heavier bleeding and cramping and stuff. But they said, call the practice on Monday morning and we'll bring you in for an ultrasound to see what's going on. So I was able to schedule an appointment for Monday afternoon. So we went in, and so I was just really worried that I was having a miscarriage or was going to have a miscarriage. And so when we were in the ultrasound, sort of immediately on the screen, these 2 black blobs kind of showed up, but I had no idea what I was looking at. And then finally the ultrasound tech said, okay, so what I'm seeing here is twins. And my husband and I were just like in complete shock. I think I started just laughing nervously. He was completely silent, basically for the next probably 10 minutes or something. And yeah, we were just, it had never crossed my mind that was a possibility. I don't even know that I was thinking about this at that point, but it's like neither, or, we don't have twins in our families. I just had never really thought it was a possibility. So just total shock. And so then I guess, and then, the ultrasound tech confirmed that they did both have heartbeats. Then we had to, and I guess she found that, So then she discovered that the source of the bleeding was the fact that there was this subchorionic hematoma. So from there, we went back to the waiting room to wait a couple minutes for one of the OBs to meet with us to discuss it. So the subchorionic hematoma, which is like some bleeding between where the placenta is attaching and the uterine wall, it wasn't huge, and they couldn't really tell, I guess, when the embryos are that small, which one it was near, which one it was impacting. Because the twins were diagnosed so early, they could make a really easy determination that they were dichorionic diamniotic twins, meaning that they had separate placentas and separate amniotic sacs. That does usually mean they're fraternal twins, and it's the lowest risk type of twins that you can have. So when we talked with the OB, actually, I guess one of the first things I said was, am I too short to have twins? Because I'm like 5'1", so I was immediately worried about just like whether my body could handle a twin pregnancy. And then the second thing that I said was like, can I still have midwifery care? And in fact, so this practice, they could still take me as a patient, and I would still have midwives as my main care providers. And I could plan to give birth at the hospital that the practice attended deliveries at, a local hospital here, which is part of the same health system as a larger hospital regionally, which is the only hospital in the area that has a NICU, a neonatal intensive care unit. So the plan was I could still give birth at this more local hospital as long as I was giving birth at 35 weeks of gestation or later. At that point, they said twins tend to do pretty well and typically wouldn't need to go to the NICU, so they would be able to take care of them there. So that was kind of the plan going forward. We absorbed the shock and told everybody, or our families that already knew, just our immediate families at that time. Yeah.
So were you tall enough?
I mean, so actually I read a lot more about twins after that. And apparently you are slightly more likely to become pregnant with twins if you are taller, and you're also more likely to carry twins to term if you're taller. So it's better to be taller if you're pregnant with twins, but you can have them if you're short. So soon after that, so I actually hadn't been having a lot of pregnancy symptoms other than my breasts feeling kind of large and tender. But after that, so soon after we found out they were twins, I was kind of hit with nausea, which it was pretty typical nausea, although that was another thing. I kind of had thought that I might not really have morning sickness because I'm someone that rarely gets nauseous. I never throw up, and I never did throw up, but I just had this kind of like constant low-grade nausea for 6 or 7 weeks. And then the other thing I'll say about the early time with it being a twin pregnancy, one of the very early symptoms that I had with that was I was starving. Like I was waking up in the middle of the night and having to eat a snack. I noticed becoming much hungrier than usual from very early on. And I also developed like a small, only visible to me, but like I could notice a bump at about 8 weeks, and started wearing like the maternity pants that have those little like triangle inserts probably by like 9 or 10 weeks. And so I was still wearing clothes where I could disguise it from other people that I was pregnant, but like I could notice a bump from extremely early on.
Wow, that is really early.
Yeah. And I was kind of like, is this possible? But yeah, I have photo evidence that I've looked back and been like, yeah, that definitely was not normal for me. So yeah, and then so with the subchorionic hematoma, they did ultrasounds every 2 weeks until the second trimester. So I had the first ultrasound at 6 weeks, then one at 8 weeks, one at 10 weeks, and then that was going to be the last one until the anatomy scan. And the subchorionic hematoma, I think it got like slightly smaller. It kind of broke into 2 at one point. They weren't that. In terms of how big it wasn't huge compared to what some people that have that have. And I never had another big episode of bleeding at all. So I did spend the first trimester being more worried about miscarriage than I had expected because of that, but it wasn't a huge deal. So at about 13, 14 weeks, I started feeling a lot better. I ended up telling my work that I was pregnant, which was also kind of a big relief because, again, in academia, we're like planning the future semesters and teaching loads and stuff like that. And I was it just felt uncomfortable to be talking about that. Like I was going to be there when I knew that I was going to be on leave in the fall. So let's see. Yeah. So we had the anatomy scan at about 19 weeks. So I had, I guess, again, when I thought about assuming I was having a singleton pregnancy, I had liked the idea of not finding out the sex. But I think with twins, it just felt like there were a lot more like unknowns, although maybe I would have decided I wanted to know even if I'd had a singleton pregnancy. But so anyway, we did find out the sex and we found out that it was 2 girls, which we were super excited about. I had really been hoping that it was going to be at least 1 girl, and we were very excited to find out it was 2 girls. Most things looked really good, but the other thing that happened with that was that baby B, so with twins, they call one baby A and one baby B. Baby A is the one that's closest to the cervix. But so baby B had what's called a velamentous cord insertion, which means that the end of the cord that is inserted into the placenta is not covered by the protective, I think it's called like Wharton's jelly or something, that the rest of the cord is. And then also it was inserted over to the side instead of in the middle. So this can be a problem depending on where the placenta is, because if that part of the cord it goes before the baby, like into the cervix, the blood supply can be cut off. But because of the way the placentas were placed, they actually weren't worried about that with us. But again, so I'm a researcher, so I went and read a lot of the medical literature about velamentous and marginal cord insertions, and it basically increases the risk of all the different bad things, including preterm birth, including a lot of different negative outcomes. But it's not like, it might like double the risk, but the numbers are still really low. So that was just like another thing where it kind of felt like, oh man, I wish that we could have just gotten sort of a clean bill of health from the anatomy scan. But for having that situation, it wasn't that bad because we didn't have to worry about the issue of the cord being compressed in front of the baby. So yeah, that was the anatomy scan.
Did you have more ultrasounds scheduled with it being twins?
Yes. So with twins, I had one maybe at like 24 weeks and then 28. It was like they were every 4 weeks, and then they were going to increase to every 2 weeks. And then it was going to be, alternating between biophysical profiles where they do an ultrasound and non-stress tests. And just everything was going to get more frequent as time went on. So I think around 32 weeks, I was going to be having weekly appointments. But yeah, so I did have a couple of extra ultrasounds like in that second and early third trimester, which was reassuring.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was actually like in terms of physical discomforts. So again, I was a lot larger, a lot earlier than I think most people are with a singleton pregnancy. I started going to prenatal yoga around maybe like 15 weeks. And that was kind of just an interesting comparison because there were a lot of pregnant women at different stages, and I could see kind of how big I was compared to other people. But also with that, it was like, by the time I was in my 28 weeks or something, it's like I was very large, but I was like, other people would be talking about different physical health problems they were having. And I was fine. I just was walking really slow. So yeah. And actually, I guess I'll mention this because this is one of the resources that I put. So I read a couple of books specifically about twin pregnancy. And there's this one called When You're Expecting Twins, Triplets, or Quads, that one of the authors had done this research on weight gain in pregnancies, including twin pregnancies. And so her big recommendation was that with twin pregnancies, you should gain like an absolute minimum of 40 pounds, and you should try to gain half of that, I think like before 20 weeks. And this would sort of maximize the size of the babies at earlier gestational ages, so they would be bigger in case you gave birth preterm. So I wasn't like forcing myself to eat or anything, but I was like, I think it was good to like have that guideline of being like, I should never worry about gaining too much weight. And ultimately, with the way my appetite was and stuff, I just kind of gained what was what would have gone along with those guidelines anyway. I don't think I quite gained 20 pounds by 20 weeks, but I'd maybe gained like 17 pounds by 20 weeks. So in the later ultrasounds that I had, so around like maybe 28 weeks or 28, 30 weeks, I had one. So both babies had been measuring at the 50th percentile for size. So that felt like pretty good, like they were growing appropriately. So regarding planning for the birth, so I had always been interested in the idea of an unmedicated birth, but the decision-making was complicated with having twins. So with the practice that I was giving birth with and at the hospital I was planning to give birth at, you could still try to have twins vaginally as long as baby A was head down. So if baby B was breech, they would still attempt to do a vaginal breech delivery for baby B. In terms of the decision around planning to have an epidural or trying to go unmedicated, thinking about it with twins, the risk of not having an epidural was that if baby A was born vaginally, but then I needed like an emergency C-section for baby B, then I might end up with general anesthesia if they couldn't place a spinal fast enough. And then the other thing that I was worried about is even if you do have both twins vaginally, sometimes they need to be more interventive for the second baby, or like if they're breech, sometimes they actually like pull the baby out more. And I just wasn't sure that I would want to be unmedicated if that was the case. So this was something that I was like waffling about through a lot of my pregnancy, was what I wanted to do around that. Most of the I think pretty much all the ultrasounds, maybe there was one where this wasn't the case, but it did seem like both babies were head down most of the time. I hired a doula. We were thinking, again, with having twins and what our needs might be after they were born, that we might also want some hours with a postpartum doula. So we ended up hiring someone that was both a birth doula and a postpartum doula. So that was kind of what we were doing to prepare. We decided that my mom would come and stay for maybe about 4 weeks at some point after the babies were born to help us. And then, so at 32 weeks, I had an appointment with a midwife where I think this was one where they didn't do an ultrasound, or maybe I don't remember, but either way, it was like, she had said literally that everything was looking picture perfect. So it seemed like everything was going along perfectly. Like my blood pressure had always been good. The babies were measuring appropriately. Just like everything seemed good. So at that point, I went home and told my husband that I thought that I should go ahead and try for an unmedicated birth if that's what I wanted to do. And he was very supportive of that. So I had an appointment at 33 weeks. At that appointment, I was going to have an ultrasound and was going to go to those weekly, I think, biophysical profiles or other monitoring things from that point. So I was kind of excited about that because I felt like, okay, after this, I'm going to have weekly reassurance that everything's going well. And I was also really winding down at work by that point. Again, since I'm an academic, it was the summer at this point, so my time was a little bit freer. And so this was the very end of July. The night before my 33-week appointment, I couldn't sleep, which was pretty typical for me during pregnancy. I'd gone to sleep just fine, but then I woke up in the middle of the night and had a really hard time falling back to sleep and was, going to the bathroom every 5 minutes and that sort of thing. But then at about 5 a.m., I thought I felt like a tiny gush. So, and I guess I sort of had the thought, like, could that be my water? I hope not. So I went to the bathroom and then my water very clearly like broke on the bathroom floor. So I had a little bit of a panicked moment because I was like, okay, well, this changes everything and how I'd been thinking about stuff. So I was 33 weeks pregnant. My water was broken. I woke my husband up. I guess the first thing I did was put a call into the, after hours line at the practice that I had been going to ask them, because I knew it was basically, so I was like, okay, it's not 35 weeks, so I can't give birth at that hospital. But so I wasn't sure if they would want me to come in there to like confirm that my water broke, or whether I should just go to the larger hospital that had the NICU. That again was part of the same healthcare system. So I was waiting for the midwife to call me back. We were kind of frantically packing because again, it was like 33 weeks, so we didn't have anything ready yet. I think I had just started to think that we maybe should start packing hospital bags and things like that. But so we were packing. I told my husband to get in the shower. I ended up just calling the hospital unit because there was always a midwife there. And then she told me, yeah, if it was only 33 weeks, that I should just go ahead and go to the larger hospital that had the NICU. So that was about a 45-minute drive away. So my husband took a shower. I packed. I hadn't taken a shower. I just got dressed and put a pad in or whatever. And so we drove down to the hospital. So we had prepared for this possibility. We had actually done a tour at both hospitals, so we knew kind of where stuff was at this larger hospital. So it was only like 6 or 6:30 in the morning when we arrived there. So we went to check in, and I remember it was actually really annoying with the check-in because I think they were asking, we explained the situation, and I think they wanted me to name one specific provider from the practice that I had been at, like as my main provider, but that wasn't what their model was. You rotated around with different midwives and things like that. So there wasn't like one main provider that was my doctor or midwife or whatever. So maybe I think eventually just said somebody. And we dealt with that. And then I went to triage. And so when they did that initial test strip thing to tell if it was amniotic fluid, it came up negative. And I was like, I'm positive this is amniotic fluid. And then, sure enough, when they did the sample so that they could look at it with a slide, it had the ferning pattern, which confirmed that it was amniotic fluid. So since I was only 33 weeks pregnant, what they do at that point is they want to give you 2 steroid shots 24 hours apart that speed up the fetal lung development. So I got the first steroid shot immediately. The doctor on call that I met with there was an MFM, maternal fetal medicine doctor. Oh, I guess I should have mentioned this. I'd had also my anatomy scan at this larger hospital. So because these were part of the same healthcare system, they had this relationship between the MFMs and the practice where I was going. So the MFMs had reviewed other ultrasounds and stuff that I'd had. So in some ways, it was like I was having care from doctors that were familiar with kind of higher risk situations, even though I'd been at this midwifery practice. Anyway, so the MFM doctor that we met with explained that so they would admit me to the hospital. They weren't really sure what was happening at that point. Like they could tell from the monitor that I was having contractions, but they were so weak that they weren't even contractions that I could feel. So at that point, they kind of weren't sure if I might like imminently go into labor or not, but I was going to be getting a ton of IV antibiotics. And then if I made it to 34 weeks, at that point, if I hadn't gone into labor, they would actually induce me because babies born at 34 weeks do pretty well. So at that point, the risk of infection would outweigh the benefits of having more time in utero. So I was admitted. Actually, we kind of got there just at the right time because triage got really busy after that. And we might have had trouble like getting a room in a timely manner. But fortunately, I got taken up to a room. I had to have 24 hours of continuous monitoring, which was horrible. Those fetal monitors, I think, are probably terrible no matter what, but especially with twins because they have to have one monitor for each baby. And so it was like constantly they're either losing one baby or realize that both monitors are actually monitoring the same baby. So it was really hard with that like 24 hours of monitoring for them to even get like a continuous read on both of them for kind of any length of time. And I remember that first day, since I hadn't showered, I was like, once we got admitted and stuff, I really wanted to take a shower, but they were like, no, not until I think they wanted just 20 minutes. And it took like all day to get one continuous 20-minute monitoring of both of them. But then, so the next day they let me get off that. I had the second steroid shot and I did not go into labor. So, that was good because with the steroid shots, they want you to stay pregnant for 24 hours after the second shot for those to have their full effect. But then we were just like hanging around the hospital for several days. So my water broke on a Wednesday morning. I would be 34 weeks pregnant at, on Tuesday. So at midnight, Monday night, which is when they would start the induction if I hadn't already gone into labor. So we just had a couple of days of hanging around the hospital. In retrospect, so my husband, I think he went home to sleep like one night. And in retrospect, I don't know why he stayed with me or why we had him stay with me so much, but because I think that we still thought that like I could imminently go into labor at any point. But that was probably in retrospect less likely than it felt like at the time. So it was too bad because he was sleeping on one of those fold out things in my hospital room, which, probably didn't start him off as well rested as he could have been. So then as we got through as the weekend was rolling around, as Sunday was rolling around, then I was starting to think more of like, man, I really didn't want to have an induction. So we were thinking about things like, are there other things I could do to try to get labor going? We had talked to our doula about I forget if it was acupuncture or acupressure, but she knew someone that could come in. Ultimately, I didn't because it was like, it's going to be like another $200, and we were already like spending so much money on a million different things for twins. So I didn't do that. I was kind of interested in like potentially using a breast pump, but the doctors actually weren't comfortable with me doing that because they thought they were kind of, I guess it made them uncomfortable that they kind of like couldn't control like if it got things going or something, which seemed kind of ridiculous to me, but I went along with it. And I guess the other thing I'll just say, like, so during that time in the hospital, while we were waiting to see if I went into labor, we had a consultation with anesthesia. We also had a consultation with one of the NICU doctors who came to talk to us, kind of about like what to expect, which was, that they would need to be in the hospital for a couple of weeks, that they thought they should probably be able to, breathe okay at that point. And, just that, they were at a old enough gestational age that it was probably not a huge deal. So we just kind of waited until, so then on Sunday night, actually overnight, I started having some contractions, or I think they were contractions. It felt to me like it might be early labor. I think they were sort of sporadic, but I was feeling this overnight. And so I was kind of excited because I was like, maybe I'm going to go into labor on my own. But they stopped in the morning on Monday morning. And I will say one thing that I was surprised about is, so what it felt like to me that I hadn't heard other people describe contractions as, is it felt like gas pains, like kind of more stabby than I expected. And I will say, after I was induced and had contractions with Pitocin, that was, I think the contractions were stabbier feeling than I was hoping for. Okay, so we knew on Monday night overnight they were going to start the induction, but we didn't know how dilated I was because also with my water being broken, they didn't want to actually examine my cervix. So when I had arrived at the hospital, they had done a sterile speculum exam, because I guess maybe that was how they had to get the swab of amniotic fluid. But so just from a visual look, I think they thought that like I was maybe a fingertip dilated or whatever. But so I'd kind of been hopeful with having something going on the night before that maybe so they were going to check me on Monday night before starting the induction and see where I was at. And I was hopeful that maybe I'd made some progress because of that. But when they checked me, it turned out that I was a fingertip dilated and I think 30% effaced. And I think cervix was still posterior. So it was not like, it was a little bit disappointing. But so the plan was that they would use a Foley bulb, which is this, they basically put like a Foley catheter in and inflate the end with water. And then there's like a tube coming out and they tape it to the inside of your leg. So it just puts pressure on your cervix to mechanically cause it to open. And then it would fall out when you're like 3 or 4 centimeters. So I had that. I was really nervous about, I was really freaking out about getting it inserted because I guess the one other thing I'd had like go up my cervix ever was getting my IUD inserted, which was horrifically painful for me. So I was really, really worried about this. And so I was asking like, could they give me anything? What could we do? So they ended up letting me use nitrous oxide for the Foley bulb insertion, which I did. And I'm not sure that it really made it less painful, but it kind of gave me something to focus on while they were doing it. So I found it helpful overall. And so I had the Foley bulb in for, I think, 3 or 4 hours, and it's just really uncomfortable. It just creates these like really, really crampy feelings. And every time I went to the bathroom, it was like I would have like this, I guess it was like the position of sitting on the toilet would give me this like horrible cramp. And then, so I think around like 6 or 6:30 in the morning, I went to the bathroom, and while having one of those horrible cramps on the toilet, it fell out, and I was unbelievably happy and relieved because it was just like such relief to have it gone. And I was happy that it meant that I had made enough progress that it could come out. So when the MFMs were rounding that morning, so it was like right after the Foley bulb had fallen out, they checked me again. And I think with the Foley bulb, I'd actually only dilated to like 2.5 or something. So it was some progress, but not like 4 centimeters or something. But so they were going to start me on Pitocin. And that was the plan. They started me on Pitocin, and for several hours, they turned it up gradually. It was like, I was, feeling contractions, but it was fine. I was still hungry. I think I ate breakfast. I think I even ate an early lunch. And then around like 12 or 1, things started to get painful. I can't even remember what I was doing to cope or not cope at this point. My husband was there with me. As things started to get painful, I think around 2, we called our doula and asked her to come, and she got there about 3. So then for a while, I was using nitrous oxide. I was sitting on a birthing ball, eating a popsicle between contractions, which was nice. The nurse that I had that day was awesome. She actually had adult twins herself, and it was her last day working before she was going to be retiring. But she was just like really nice, really supportive. And I don't remember exactly, at what points I got checked that day or how much I had dilated, but I know that my dilation was really slow throughout the day. So again, since I'd had this whole hospitalization in advance of the labor, I'd talked to the MFMs that would be attending the birth, and they really wanted me to get an epidural, which I was fine with because I could tell again, so being at this different hospital with maternal fetal medicine doctors, I felt that, their style was likely to be more interventive, especially for baby B. And I was not comfortable doing that, even thinking about doing that unmedicated. And then also that they weren't comfortable with me doing it unmedicated either. So I was planning to get an epidural, but I wanted to delay it until I was hopefully maybe like 6 centimeters dilated. So they had checked me at some point during the afternoon, and I think I was like 4. So around 6 or 7 p.m., I forget why, but there was some reason that was going to be a good time to get an epidural. And I think, I was having trouble coping, and it seemed likely at that point that like maybe I was 6 centimeters. So I got the epidural. That whole process like wasn't great, but it was fine. I know I'd asked them for like a lighter epidural, and the anesthesiologist was kind of like, oh, we only, there's only one way that we do it. And I was like, okay, fine. But it ended up actually being perfect. It was like, I could still feel my legs, and I could still, with some difficulty, like move them, but the pain was totally gone. So it actually was perfect. And then, but I think they checked me after the epidural, and I was still only like 4 centimeters or something. So that again was like a little bit disappointing, but now I had the epidural, so I was feeling good. The nurse that I'd had during the day that was so awesome stayed with me through getting the epidural, but then it was like shift change. And I remember that I was like, I was very sad when she left and wished that she could stay. So overnight, there were different doctors that were on call. So it was the regular OB service rather than the maternal fetal medicine doctors. And so at some point during the, later in the evening, they came to see me, and I actually really liked that doctor. And I guess at that point, it kind of seemed likely that I might deliver overnight, although that didn't turn out to happen. So this is now Tuesday night. So the Pitocin had actually been only turned up to 14 units during the day, which is not the maximum, even though I was dilating really slowly. And at the time, the MFMs during the day were like, they're looking for a certain number of contractions within a 10-minute period, and they don't want to like go past that because then you could be contracting too much, and then the babies could start to go into distress. But the OBs at night were like, okay, since I'd been dilating so slowly, they definitely wanted to turn it up to the maximum. And then they were even thinking about if they hit the maximum and I still wasn't dilating more, potentially using an intrauterine pressure catheter where they can actually measure the force of the contractions to see what was going on and possibly turn the Pitocin up even more than that. And actually, so I hadn't been aware of this during the day, but I think something that was said during this time made it seem like during the day, perhaps the doctors had been dealing with some other emergency. So they'd been actually pretty conservative in how they were managing my Pitocin, because they didn't want to have me go into some sort of emergency situation when they were dealing with something else, which had been fine with me. So they turned up the Pitocin to maximum, over however long it takes to do that overnight. And they ended up being okay enough with, again, slow but steady progress overnight that that was fine. So, so we went all night. My husband and my doula both kind of slept some. I was resting, but I didn't actually fall asleep. I remember my doula was like giving me a foot massage at one point, which felt really good. And I was just kind of resting. And they were checking me occasionally. Every couple of hours, the nurse would drain my bladder with a straight catheter, which I guess one thing that I remember about that was I was starting to like have some swelling, such that by, maybe like 5 a.m. or something, like even with the epidural, doing that was a little bit uncomfortable. But so anyway, when the MFMs came back on call in the morning, they came in and checked me. It was probably like 7:30, and I was fully dilated. So that was exciting. It felt like it had taken a really long time. So the induction had been going on for like, well over 24 hours at that point. And so I'd known that it's pretty common with twin vaginal deliveries that they have you give birth in the operating room in case they have to do an emergency cesarean, either for both or especially for the second twin. So once I was fully dilated, things actually moved really quickly, and we kind of weren't prepared for that. So there was like this flurry of activity. And so I guess I hadn't realized that we wouldn't be coming back to the same room after giving birth. But so we had to like pack up all of our stuff really quickly and like put it on this cart because they had basically booked an OR, and, that's like taking up an OR for however long they have it. So they wanted to get me in there. So I think we got into the OR at about 8:30 in the morning. So there was another nurse on during the day. And I actually really did not like this nurse. And this is like one of the things in retrospect, like I should have asked for a different nurse. She was new to the hospital. And one of the things that I was worried about with the OR, so I guess I did know that these doctors wanted me to actually give birth on the OR table. So not a labor and delivery bed in the OR, but like the operating table. And this nurse had heard that they were also going to require me to push with my legs in the stirrups, which I was like really, really against. I was like, I'm not going to do that. I was just very upset at that idea. And I'd heard from some other nurse that like, no, that wasn't going to be the case. And she was like, no, I checked with some other people. And they said, so it was this whole weird thing with that. And she was also just like, I don't know, I didn't like this nurse. Anyway, so we got to the operating room, and they didn't require that I use the stirrups to push. But they did they wanted me to be on the OR table. So the only position that they wanted me to push in was to basically be on my back on the OR table, have my husband and one of the nurses each hold a leg up and sort of, curl up and, count to 10, push, that kind of thing. And so I was like, okay, fine. I was trying to push like that. I would say I did not feel the urge to push, but I mean, I was feeling, even with the epidural, I had been feeling sort of this like rectal pressure with contractions, actually for a couple of hours. So, I was like feeling stuff. There were other people there too. And this is funny, like, so when you have twins, if you're having twins vaginally, there's a lot of people there because they have like a whole, they have a team for each baby. They have different people for me. It was very fuzzy about who was there, and I definitely didn't care that there were a lot of people in the room. But they also, they had like the bright lights on and everything. Like it wasn't the greatest place. But so there were some other nurses too. So someone had suggested, so they brought me a mirror so that I could kind of see what was happening. I was trying to push that way. But I guess I just like wasn't really making a lot of progress. And the doctors were concerned because things were starting to get swollen. So I had kind of wanted, because again, I had this plenty of feeling in my legs and stuff, or I felt like with help, I had enough feeling in my legs to try some other positions for pushing. And they didn't like forbid me from doing it, but they were completely unsupportive of the idea of my doing that. Like they were kind of like, well, you can try whatever you want, but we think this is the most effective thing for you to do, even though like, it's been going on and it wasn't effective. So finally they were like, okay, this has been going on for a really long time and we have to do something. They said it's like been 2 hours or 2.5 hours. And I was just like, that can't be possible. But they meant since I was fully dilated. And I think what they were looking at was, I think I'd gone like 30 minutes of pushing without making progress. So it was like, I'd sort of pushed the first baby down, but she was stuck under my pubic bone. And then I just like wasn't really making progress after that. So they introduced the idea that they wanted to use forceps to get her unstuck. I immediately sort of broke down at the idea of forceps. That was just something that like felt very scary to me. And yeah, it was just like sort of this visceral response of that being really upsetting. And I remember my doula said, like, why don't you ask if you can try pushing in a different position for 10 minutes and then we'll see. And I was really appreciative that she made that suggestion, but I just said no, because I just already felt like I was under so much time pressure. And I think like this is a real problem of having people deliver in the OR was I think to me, I felt like there was this like strong sense of like, I'm taking up an OR and they want to empty out this OR. So like that kind of felt to me like where some of the pressure was coming from. And now that they already like what they wanted to do was use forceps. And I just felt like I couldn't imagine like having success with something else kind of under those conditions. So I said, no, like, I guess let's just do the forceps. And I guess now I can't really remember. So it did turn out that baby A was OP or occiput posterior. So her face was up instead of down. I can't remember if they said that then and knew that was why she was stuck under my pubic bone. I don't remember. But so they ended up using forceps just to get her under my pubic bone. And then I actually like pushed her. They didn't pull her out with the forceps. I was able to just push her out. It actually wasn't that bad, like, or whatever I had been thinking about with forceps, like it wasn't that bad. So she was out. They put her on my stomach. And I was just like, I couldn't believe there was a baby on my stomach. Like it was kind of like just with 30 hours of this induction and everything. I kind of forgot that like when I was done, like there were babies that were going to come out. So I was just totally shocked. So they put the first baby on my stomach. And I think my husband might have been able to cut the cord, although we hadn't really, they'd asked us about that and we didn't really have strong feelings about it. I think he did cut the cord. And so she was on my stomach for maybe 30 seconds, maybe a little longer, maybe a minute. But then they thought she was having some issues. So the NICU team came and started working with her. It was nothing that I was like worried about. But so I did get to have that little bit of immediate skin to skin and like see her and stuff. So pretty quickly they were like, okay, let's, start thinking about baby B. And I think that was also, I was distracted with the first baby because I was still thinking like, okay, there's still like a second baby. And that's actually kind of the more dicey part. Cause I like, with, I was, cause the worst scenario with a twin delivery is that you would like have the first baby vaginally and then need a cesarean for the second. So they had me kind of try to push her down like right away. So I think I did. And then what happened was she basically ended up in the birth canal in, I think, a brow presentation, which basically meant, so she was both OP, so occiput posterior. Again, the second one also was OP. But then instead of having her chin flexed, her chin was extended. And you basically can't have a baby born vaginally, like if their chin's not tucked. But they said they could, again, use forceps to flex her chin and get her out. So they wanted to use forceps with the second baby. And so in this case, I was actually like pretty immediately like, yeah, fine. Because it was, like I said, with the first baby, it hadn't been as bad as I expected. And I just kind of like wanted to get this over with. So they used forceps with the combination of forceps and pushing. They were able to get her out. But I could just tell like through the epidural, I just felt like this like pain. So I think I had asked after the first baby was out if I'd torn. I think they said like a little bit, but I could tell that I'd like torn worse with the second baby just because I could just feel it. And she was visibly immediately, like she was much bigger than the first baby. So she was born. Again, she was able to come to my stomach for, 30 seconds, maybe a little longer than 30 seconds. And then the NICU team took her away. So I guess at this point, my husband went with both babies to the NICU and my doula was with me. Oh, I guess the other important detail to give at this point. So pretty much from when they initially suggested using forceps with the first baby, like for the next long period of time, like I was just like pretty much sobbing the whole time. Maybe I had stopped for a little bit, like after the first baby was born, but with the second baby, I was like with the pain from that, I was worried that I'd torn really badly. Like I just, my body had been through a lot. I hadn't slept in 2 days. I was just like crying and crying and crying. My husband was really worried about me But we had decided in advance that he would go to the NICU with the babies and our doula would stay with me. And, she was great. She was really reassuring. So it turned out with the second baby coming out that I had had a 3rd-degree tear, which means that the tear has gone through your perineum to your anus. And so I was like, and again, because I'm a researcher in the area of maternity care, like I'd heard of this, I knew what this was. I knew this is like kind of considered a bad outcome. And I was like really freaked out about it. So yeah, so once both babies were out, I had them just put more medication in the epidural. And so there was basically another 2 hours in the OR of doing the repair and trying to get the placentas out. So basically alternating between doing some stitching and trying to see if the placentas would come out. Like, so doing a couple stitches, then having me push, or I guess, maybe they were pulling lightly on the cords or whatever. But ultimately they had to do a manual extraction of the placentas, which, I'd heard about before being like really, really potentially painful. But actually with the amount of medication in the epidural and stuff, it turned out to be okay. It just felt like unbelievably invasive, like with my body, just like having been just going through all of this. So even though like it wasn't that painful, it was kind of traumatic, I guess. And again, just like that amount of time there. And I just like kind of wanted that to be done and everybody to like leave my vagina alone. Yeah. But so my doula was there with me. Actually, so I guess my husband he'd gone to the NICU and then he came back because he was really worried about me. And then maybe he went back to the NICU again. Maybe he was there with us when we went back to the room or when we went to the new postpartum room. So that was the actual birth part. And I guess what I'll just also say is like, I wasn't worried about the babies because I knew that like, I don't know, it was like, I just felt confident that it was like nothing was wrong with them other than being like a little bit premature. And I knew that, the regular hospital care would be fine. And I guess I just was a lot more focused on what was going on with my own body. So we got our new room and I guess the first couple of things, I think they brought me a pump right away. But so I guess when I got there, the couple things that needed to happen, I got some food. I think I tried to pump at some point. So they were going to like have me eat some food and then try to go to the bathroom. And then, because then it was like, okay. And then, so if I could go to the bathroom, then I could go up to the NICU and see the babies. So at this point it was probably like 12 or 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And the babies had been born at around 10:30 in the morning. So I ate. I was going to try to go to the bathroom, but I ended up fainting when the nurse took me to the bathroom. So I didn't end up seeing the babies until about like 8 o'clock that night. So they ended up being in the NICU for 2 weeks. Well, actually, they were in the NICU for like 4 or 5 days, and then they were in the continuing care nursery for another 10 days. So in the hospital for a total of 2 weeks. We opted to just go stay at home after I was discharged from the hospital and just spend several hours, like maybe 5 hours a day, 5-6 hours a day at the NICU with them instead of staying overnight somewhere closer by. Like there's a Ronald McDonald House and stuff like that. But for us, it just felt a lot better to be home. So I'd been worried, like, in the initial aftermath, like I'd felt kind of like traumatized by the actual birth experience, but I guess over time it, didn't really seem to cause any lasting issues. But in the first couple of days, it was like I would try to go to sleep and I would be sort of, thinking about what had happened and feeling upset about it and stuff like that. But that diminished pretty quickly over time. So it didn't end up being a big deal. Breastfeeding was difficult to establish. They were basically just not developmentally ready to breastfeed when they were born. And so I pumped a lot. I was like really dedicated to making sure that I built up enough supply that I would have supply for both of them. So while they were in the NICU, I was, pumping every 3 hours at night and every 2 hours during the day. So I was pumping a ton. But ultimately, we had a lactation consultant at our pediatrician's office. So we'd met with her several times, both in individual appointments. And she also had this like weekly breastfeeding group that she led. So we got a lot of help from her. We tried nipple shields for a while, like all this different stuff. Well, I even got another like private lactation consultant that came to our house. We tried a supplemental nursing system, but ultimately when they were like a month past their due date, Lola, baby A, started nursing and having no problem. Phoebe, who is baby B, she had kind of developed a bottle preference. It seemed like because she would sort of latch and then kind of lose interest after a couple minutes and just cry. So, and that went on for like so long that I'd kind of given up hope that she would nurse. But it was kind of like with a singleton baby born at term, you could do things to avoid them ending up with a bottle preference, but it was like, to leave the hospital, one of the things that had to happen is they had to be able to take their feedings from a bottle instead of from a nasal gastric tube. So we were just focused on that, not on like, we couldn't think about the longer term of like having them breastfeed. So at 5 months old, so like 3.5 months adjusted, I guess, Phoebe did just randomly do it one day. I was like, I would still try to like latch her before we would give her a bottle. And it was like at one feeding, I was like, oh, actually, I think she might have gotten enough that she just nursed, or that she'd be fine just nursing. And so we didn't give her a bottle. And then, the next time I just nursed her and it was fine. So I was really happy that was able to happen, but it was also so late that I was going back to work at that point. So it didn't really make our lives as much easier as I would have hoped. So during basically the whole time that I was on parental leave, I was nursing Lola and then pumping and then using that milk to give Phoebe a bottle and then bottle feeding them expressed milk at night. Just because that was like the habit or not the habit, but the routine that we got into. So I'm really happy that we were ultimately able to breastfeed, and they still are breastfeeding a little bit, just like morning and night now at 19 months. But it was a really big challenge to get there.
Yeah. It sounds like like you said, you had done a lot of research in this area beforehand and had a lot of support and everything after they arrived too.
Yeah. With the breastfeeding, like, I don't feel like the research was necessarily
right. It's like you have to like learn in the moment.
Yeah.
Totally.
The real key thing was that I had like, a long parental leave for the US. So I was like, I wouldn't have been able to sustain that if I had been going back to work sooner.
Yeah.
So yeah.
All right. Well, speaking of research, did you want to share any resources?
Yeah. So I love the book, The Birth Partner, which I had my husband read also when I was pregnant, and he liked it too. The book Expecting Better by Emily Oster, which has like stuff about the evidence on different things during pregnancy. A couple of the twin specific books I read were What to Do When You're Having Two and When You're Expecting Twins, Triplets, or Quads. So that was the one that I was mentioning about the like nutrition info, which I'd also heard about this book, and I agree, is that the tone is a little bit like it scared me a little bit. Like I'd say the tone of the book is like, you're going to have, underweight premature twins that are going to spend months in the NICU, or you're going to be on bed rest. So I didn't like the tone, but I did like some of the information in the book. For breastfeeding, I really liked the book Breastfeeding Made Simple, because I think, like I said, I don't think any book can like help you too much with the techniques and stuff, but I liked how that one describes sort of the principles behind milk production, and some stuff about how to think about that that I thought was useful. And then the website, Evidence-Based Birth, which provides like these sort of extensive literature reviews on a variety of topics.
Yeah. We love so many of those resources as well. We'll link to all of them on the show notes page, and people can also leave comments for you there to reach out. Thank you so much for sharing your birth story with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much again to Laura for sharing her birth story with us. If you want to find out more from this episode, you can head over to thebirthhour.com and search for her name in the search bar. And if you're interested in the Birth Hour's Know Your Options online childbirth course, you can find that information at thebirthhour.com/course. And you can use the code 100OFF for $100 off your enrollment. And of course, if you'd like to join our Patreon group, that information is at patreon.com/birthhour. And when you go there, you'll see the different options and tiers of ways to support the Birth Hour, including the perks that come with each different level, one of which is access to all of our archived episodes, which is over 600 episodes at this point. So again, that's patreon.com/birthhour, and we'd love to have you as a student in the course or a member of that Patreon group. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, head to thebirthhour.com and click Become a Member to pledge your support. And as a thank you, you'll get an invitation to join our private Facebook group and access to exclusive episodes. Your vote of confidence and support means the world to me.